This is the Trusting Our Men interview series, where I explore and unpack what is still stopping us from cultivating trust, partnership, and safety with our men. Join me and my co-host Madelyn Moon as we have difficult conversations with conscious men in hopes of building a bridge of more compassion and understanding. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trusting Our Men again. I'm your host, Nadia Munla, and I am so excited today because I have with us James CRUZEN. Such a delight to have you here. Welcome.
So happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about James, and I'll also share a little story of how we met. So James is the founder of Unspoken Leadership. He spent the last 20 years sharing his passions for relationship, communication, leadership, and the creative process as an international dance instructor, relationship coach, and business consultant. He believes in moving towards a model of leadership that outgrows dominance for collaboration, all while keeping power, warmth, and presence, that we can better understand ourselves and how we communicate by being firmly rooted in the body. And those of you who know me well know that I'm all about that. He helps business professionals master their nonverbal influence so that they can powerfully lead their team more effectively and effortlessly. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So James and I met when I moved to San Diego, and it was so awesome because I was in this place of really just going on like a geek out fest around men's role in embodiment and dance. And so we connected, and I'm really, really excited to have him here with us today because he's just chock full of information and really cool stuff. So James, I want to start us off today by just asking you, what is currently real for you in the realm of gender relations right now?
It's so great. I mentioned to you, it's such a beautiful opening question, and for some reason it's one that, I'll just be fully honest, feels so expansive that I feel like it's challenging to find a starting track for myself, even in thinking about it. Let me just start with my own kind of body and my own heart. I feel like the last 6 years or so have just been so tumultuous. If I really, really get real, the empath in me feels so much pain around the moment that it's challenging for me to really sit with it and be true with what's true and what's real. And my work is in that realm. So there's this two-sided approach that says I feel like I have so much to say on it and I have so much insight, and at the same time there's a part of me that, if I'm really honest, is very checked out to the truth of the trauma and the pain and this moment as we peel back some of the scabbing, I feel like, around this wound and really start to examine, how do we move forward, how do we heal, and what's next. And that's part of why I'm so grateful to you and Maddie for this invitation and for the framework of these interviews and this conversation of how do we move back to a place of trust, trusting ourselves, trusting each other. So
yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because that is what's true for you. And it sounds like you are sharing an experience that so many of us are having, where there is, even myself deciding to create this interview series, let me be clear, there are many times where I've checked out, and there's many times when I've been overwhelmed, or when I've gone back into a certain trauma, foggy headed spell, and so I think it's really, really great and courageous for everyone involved, to be coming forth no matter what's going on for them, and really being like, hey, I'm willing to have this conversation, which is really part of what I want to talk to you about today, is this idea of, we are in this very tumultuous era, right? Things are getting really crunchy. And that can also be a really great sign, because you got to go crunchy. You got to go into rearranging stuff before you can clear, before you can open and expand into the next phase of things. But we're still in that crunchy era. And as we are going through the crunchy era of gender relations being a little tense, a little might be an understatement, getting tense, what do we need to do to really show up as embodied leaders? And I'd love for you to speak to this both from, men's roles and women's roles, because I do think, there's a piece of it that's all of us, and then there's a piece that's specific to, historically and systematically sort of what's shown up for men and women.
Right. Yeah, there's so many levels to this. I'll make a little disclaimer, which is that I'm a total geek on these things too, and I can get super heady and philosophical. And I want to just make an intention for this conversation to stay as much in my body and as much in my heart as I can. So in so doing, I really feel like you asked me, what does it take for us to be leaders and embodied leaders? A little bit of life story. My background was like, as I looked at my life story, I really realized that there was some key moments in my childhood where big parts of my body's, my selfhood kind of checked out, where I was physically moved from place to place to place to place. And it was like, I don't feel super safe in my body. And I felt a little checked out. And a lot of times it felt like looking at my life through a glass window or something, like a little bit removed from it because it was easier and it didn't hurt as much. And I remember a key point where we moved one more time and all my friends got lost again. I remember my heart just kind of shutting off and going, you know what, like, I'm done with this. I'm not making friends again. I'm not going deep there again because it just hurts to lose them so much. And now as I round like midlife and I've done so much healing, I look back and I go, oh, it's been a 20-year process of reclaiming my body, of reclaiming safety in my heart, and not just running around the world trying to figure it out in my head, from a place where I feel safe because I've mentally been able to construct stuff and position my ego to feel safe. And so now, for me, that journey, part of that journey of finding my body was going into partner dance, which turned into a career, which was 15 to 20 years of amazing swing dancing around the world. And as I look back and do the work that I do now, I really realize how many lessons I learned on the dance floor doing improvised swing dance with thousands and thousands of partners all over the world. And a big part of my message of what I'm about now is realizing that I believe half of leadership is what I call followship. That half of creating is listening. And that in the dance, it's a nice analogy. It has its limitations, but there's a leader and a follower. And when you first start, the leader has a very defined role and the follower has a very defined role. And the outcome is to get the step right. And so the leader does their best to really give clear signals. The follower does their best to receive the signals and do what is asked in the moment. And success is the pattern was done. And the beauty of jazz, the beauty of that dance and what it taught me was over time, I realized once you have that established, then you get to this place where, well, we want to create space so that the follow is also actively contributing and embellishing and artistic. And now it's more cooperative. It's not as firmly structured in the roles. Like we get to flex a little more. And if you take it far enough, you get to the space where you're both so tapped into the music, like that's actually what's leading you individually. And then roles almost drop out completely. And it's just a space of like, well, what does the moment have for us? Are you going to lead it? Am I going to lead it? I'm listening to you. I don't have any idea what's coming. I'm going to hold a solid frame and be totally open to what could happen, because that's what leadership is at that level. And it's been very interesting in my coaching with couples and the Conscious Dance Academy movement, and now in my business work. It's amazing how much of what I do with clients is bringing them to that understanding in their own body. Like, I am at choice, I'm at will, I can control my outcomes, and I'm a leader by making shit happen. And that's really valuable. And what I see in this moment is where we culturally and collectively have an opportunity to look at, I am part of a bigger whole. I'm not fully autonomous. I'm also part of relationships and families and communities. And as such, like, I listen, I get still, like I'm not fully at will. I'm also passively receiving what comes through me. And that's a whole different place. And I believe as a whole, we see that as weakness. Like those of us who embody or show up in that, like, I'm going to care for everyone. I'm here for everyone. I'm going to be still and listen. And I'm easily moved and I'm tapped into what's happening. It's like, well, you don't have a defined sense of who you are and what you want, and you're not driving your outcomes. So you're not in leadership.
So how does this like show up? So I'm loving all of this, and you and I have geeked out on this for hours already. What, I'm so curious to know what parallels you draw between all of this and the difficult conversations and the communication that we need to have now between, you know, anyone who identifies as a woman, anyone who identifies as a man, post Me Too.
Beautiful question. Hmm. And I'd love to speak to my limited perspective. Like, I really feel like in these situations, like I only have my one perspective. Um, and I like to geek out, which is very here and very not human. This is my experience. So I just want to put that on the table. One of the pieces that's been really important for me is learning to be able to show up in my whole body, which means for me, being able to sense what's happening in my body in sensation, being able to feel and be aware of what emotions I'm having in that moment, and then to objectively, to some level, be objectively look at my thoughts as not myself. And if I could do, when I do that and also hold space to feel what's happening with another person and
Mm.
sense their senses and their emotions and their feelings and thoughts, and not be one person, for me to merge and separate and say, this is my thoughts, these are my emotions, these are my feelings, and I'm holding space for you. And now let's find a place to connect from that.
Mhm.
I find that those moments are the most connected. And then for me, the identity issues of gender and so forth, it's like, well, I just want to have a human to human connection. And I'm not trying to put you in a box. I'm not trying to understand you from my mind. I just want to feel what I feel and you feel what you feel. And it seems to shift that. It seems to
Yeah.
be more open.
So let's say let's like make this even more specific to a scenario. Okay, so let's say you are, okay, you're a guy and there's a really angry woman who you may or may not know, but not very well. She's not like your partner or anything like that. And is coming in, and there's, you know, certain righteous rage around past trauma or something historically related to, you know, just all the stuff that women had to endure. We don't need to go into the laundry list. Um, what tips, you know, you're speaking to really bringing in like your body, your heart, and then there's elements of your thoughts that obviously are involved in all of this. But as the man, what is it that you would need to do here to be the leader in having this difficult conversation? She's triggered. She's like, "Rah, rah, 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 whatever, whatever, all the years of patriarchy and white male privilege, da, da, da." What is it that on a very pragmatic level needs to happen for you to feel really connected to whatever you need to be connected to feel in your leadership? Does that make sense?
It does. It totally does. Um, hmm. So I'm, just as far as how I'm wired into, like, personally, I'm very open and empathetic. So like I very naturally feel the emotions of people that are around me. It's
Mm-hmm.
part of what helps me do my work. It also has been part of my growth process to separate myself from others and know what's mine and what is someone else's, when it, especially when it comes to emotional
Mm-hmm.
um, resonance. I say that because for me in those moments, what's really important is to hold a solid boundary of this is who I am, and then to be in my heart in a way that allows the person I'm with, whoever that is in whatever triggered state, to feel I empathize, I'm with you in your feeling, and I'm not trying to make it my own. So to give it real validity, to feel it with them, not for them. And then for me to, I would say, to really find what part of myself knows that feeling and hold that. Like, what part of myself has felt something similar, and then hold that without trying to write a story or tell a story about whatever it means.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm fishing for a little bit here is
Fish away.
is from an embodied perspective, what, you know, I guess I just want to bring up the conversation of what do women need from men here in this conversation around, you know, sexuality, consent, privilege, feminism, so on and so forth. And what's the opposite as well? Because I want, you know, I mean, the whole point of these conversations, I think, is really for us to be building this bridge of understanding and empathy, and for us to really listen to what and understand. And I'm curious, from like different guys probably have very different experiences of what it is that we need to do as women in our part of this, and then what also we really feel we need from men in order to feel we can diffuse that anger in our bodies or that trauma.
So as a child, I grew up internationally. So I went to international school, lived in France and West Africa for a good portion of my like teen years. So multi-perspective, international culture, like really being in a space of sensitivity and owning and really creating connection from a place of like very varied, diverse backgrounds and not necessarily agreeing on much was part of my, like how I did high school. I remember sitting at like lunches and talking about like just really diverse topics, you know, religion, abortion, feminism, you know, female mutilation, like all kinds of very diverse topics, and just finding middle grounds of where can we connect and what's true and what do we feel and think about this. And one of the only reason I bring that up is I always had this game when I would play empathy of like being in someone else's shoes. I always felt like I can't ever be in someone else's shoes. Like I'll never know in this lifetime, in this body, what it's like to be a woman or to be African American or to be like all of my friends from Africa. Like I would never know what it was like to have grown up in a village in Ethiopia. The only thing I could ever do that I would play as a game is to just flip the world as a negative and say, what if men experienced these things and women were in like had the power and were actually running so many of the societal organizations and so forth? Like how would I feel about it as me if the roles were swapped? Because I can never know what it is to be you. And I would play that out very often as a way to just try to feel as best I could what it might be like to be someone else. What it might be like if I were experiencing what they were experiencing, knowing I could never actually cross the threshold and be them. And I think I say that because it's one of the ways that I tried to hijack seeing from their perspective without projecting that I would know what it was like, because I never will know what it's like. And my goal is to get, or I hope that we can move towards going from roles to souls, from really being caught up in what is my role and what does it mean to like, who am I as a soul and who are you and what's possible from that place. Yeah.
From roles to souls. This is so good. I want to take it back to something I learned when you and I did a session in the partner dance world, and you were sort of speaking to this earlier a little bit. One thing that was fascinating for me was this idea that if I am the follow and I'm being led, and the person leading starts to shrink, right? So literally the body just starts to collapse a little bit. That the way in which to lift this person up and back into their strength as a leader is to nudge them a little bit in my own pushback, right? So it's not like a super intense pushback, but it was just a little bit like, okay, don't sink with the other person, because then everyone's collapsing. But instead push back a little bit and nudge them into like a little bit of like reawakening, right? Like, oh, right, I lost my posture here. And to me, this was such a profound embodied experience of what can happen both in an individual, like, you know, like two-person relationship, but also what's happening for us collectively, where the actual impetus for this entire interview series is that men were coming to me privately going, oh, I'm shrinking, you know, oh, I don't want to even flirt with anyone anymore, right? And what's happening is what I'm seeing from where I'm standing is on the other end, also as women, we're shrinking. We're going, oh, nothing's like on the one, we're either shrinking or we're pushing too hard. And so I'm curious to like have you speak to that a little bit, because there seems to be such a beautiful parallel here between what we feel in our bodies when we're doing something like a partner dance, and then also having these difficult conversations collectively.
Ooh, super great. I love the framework on that. And framework is really the key. It really does bring in the concept of frame, which I'm sure through the course of the interviews and like the people that have been through polarity and just like those roles are really valuable. Like I just spoke from roles to souls. And I think there's a real importance to understanding and mastering those roles. I don't think one of the pain points I think is that we've so divisively said this role's for this gender or this sex and this energy, and this role's for this gender, sex, and energy. And my baseline is that if we claim those in ourselves as like potential ways of being and master both ends of the spectrum, then we have the potential to show up in any energy that's needed in our personal relationships, business, whatever the case may be. And the frame is such a key piece of that. Like, how do I, as a leader, if I'm holding that role of initiating and holding space, how do I define space in a way that it can be filled? And that could be a workspace. How can I be a leader that creates a team that's real easy to like people to show up into that space and know where the boundaries are so that we can move as a team? That can be relationship, like you said. Like, how do I, if I'm holding the masculine pole in the relationship, create a sense of certainty, a sense of like rootedness, a sense of trustability that this isn't going to waver, so that in the flux of emotion or in the flux of unknowing, in the flux of what is this, that frame is set. And what happens is when that frame flexes, like you said, or starts to give, whatever energy is filling it, follow, whatever we want to call that, there's uncertainty, it feels untrustworthy. And so there's a natural response there to go untrusting, I'm going to collapse, like you said. And a lot of times there's also an opportunity to, and this is where from the body piece, if you can do so from your willpower and an open heart, it's not a where'd you go judgment. It's just that, hey, I'm still here. Hey, I'm still here. And that can wake up the container, the leader, the one holding that role to go, oh, I dropped presence. I dropped you. I didn't communicate. There was a breakdown in communication. Let me show back up. And then it becomes trustworthy again. So I don't know if that speaks enough to it.
No, totally. And even as you were speaking, I was thinking, I'm curious, it feels like this may also apply to our internal lead and follow, in the sense that, as a woman, if I find myself shrinking, which I totally have days where I am, I'm just like, oh, I can't even deal, right? Like that there's actually this other energy in me that has to nudge this shrinking part to go, no, actually come back, right? And at the same time, I can be overwhelmed or really triggered by, I don't know, yet another person in Hollywood who we found out did God knows what, right? Like, and can go into a day of being overly leading, overly pushy, overly like, I'm here and I'm going to take up the whole space and you're going to come with me. And if I'm talking to, maybe a man and I'm having these unconscious, like I'm still processing all of the news that I just heard, that I might be extra aggressive, right, in my sort of leading, like, no, this is 2019, listen, I'm a woman, we're in post Me Too now, right? Like that isn't really, that's sort of the verbal way of over leading in a sense, or just getting a little too, I don't know what to describe that. So it sounds like there's these two versions. It's like a little too much of this and then also shrinking and really being like, how can I be my own partner in consciousness in this dance, so that I can show up as the most integrated embodied leader for the collective or for my one-on-one relationships or for my business team, or depending on what size we're working with entity-wise relationally.
Yeah, love it. I agree. I think that there is an internal play of those two ways of being. And I think that everyone has access to those. And I think there are predispositions to one energetic or the other. And I think it's really great to own the value of it and to find the value in the others and to really stand in that and know this is a way of being that is natural to me and it has its value. And I love showing up in that. As you were speaking, I was also feeling the sense of like, I think we're in a moment of understanding more and more the inescapable truth that we are one, that we aren't independent in a truly independent way, but interconnected and interdependent. And as we wake up to those sensitivities that come along with that, it's, I think, more and more inescapable to try to sit in your own little world and say, this is my truth, and I don't really give a fuck how it lands with you. Like, it's a possibility, and I think it's harder and harder to sit there unless you're behind a screen typing comments to actually believe the truth of that, because when you get together with people, you feel it. We are connected. There's emotional resonance. There's viral emotions and pre-wired neurology in our systems, mirror neurons and so forth, that like we're pre-wired to feel each other's feelings, to pass that along to each other, to know our connectedness. And as you were speaking, I think, I don't know, there's just part of this process that says, for me, how do we get in dialogue around what this new way of being is in the collective interconnectedness? Like, it's great that we're all starting to get connected to our hearts and feeling what we feel. And now it's real painful when we get mashed up against each other, because I can feel all your pain and you're in a space where you can share it. And I know how to do me and you know how to do you, but shoot, we're together. And how do we do we? How do we do this interconnected heart space when we can feel each other? This is fucking hard. Like, this is challenging. I don't know what to do with your pain all the time, and you don't know what to do with my not knowing. So where do we go from here? And I think this is a moment for us to all grow together and really, in a way, kind of throw up our hands and say, how do we do this? Like, let's learn from each other. We haven't really played in this space yet together. So let's see how we can do this best.
Would you say that there's more of a trend of people coming together and feeling each other and feeling overwhelmed by that? Or do you see more of a trend of actually the opposite, like people getting overwhelmed by the feelings and actually backing away?
I think it's very dependent on, I think there's sub-communities where this is happening in different ways. I think there's a bit of a threshold to stepping into that vulnerability and personal transformation work to understand, oh, this is what I feel and I'm connected to it, and I can really do that inner work. And for those who are attracted to that or willing to do that work, I think once you cross a threshold, you realize how sweet it can be to hold that space with others and to feel that connectedness on a larger scale. And then I think it suddenly can become a boon, and people get excited to be in those spaces, and it actually can be very healing. And I just feel like there are others for whom, like, if you haven't made that connection, if the heart isn't opened yet, the idea of connecting to that, of going into that space, can be very threatening. Yeah.
My sense too is that, both of us are in very particular sort of sub communities in the personal development world. And so many men are still dealing with a lot of, very basic toxic masculinity messages around, manning up, don't feel your feelings. Now there's an additional, like, don't connect to your sexuality because you're going to get fired, which of course is a fear-based motivation and not exactly the answer to anything. It's like, it should be coming from, I actually don't want to hurt someone's feelings or transgress their boundaries, as opposed to, I might get called out in the future. And so for the average, I guess, I don't know if average is a great word to use, but for a typical man who maybe hasn't really gotten to a safe space where he can open his heart and where he can really step into this sort of interpersonal relations, what would you, like, what advice or tips or tools would you give him to start to connect to his body?
It's a really good question. I think get out of your head, get into movement of some sort, and connect to your breath. Like, those would be like the three things. So any form of mindfulness that feels appealing to them. Like, it could be really simple transcendental meditation. It could be any form of like journaling and trying to just start to become aware of the thoughts that are running in your head and what stories are running your life that you don't know. And then the second for me is to find some form of movement that keeps you actually physically connected to your body. That could be yoga. That could also just be working out. I think that that disembodied sitting, floating head in front of a screen thing is very toxic long term. And staying connected, it could be to our power, but connected to our bodies. And then, yeah. So mindfulness. Oh, and breath work, of course. I think that is one of the most powerful ways to state change and find connection to the body. And there's so many different opportunities out there, like apps and so on and so forth. It's so easy to access that information now, and it doesn't need to be woo-woo. You don't have to go to a yoga studio to go do pranayama. Like, you can just get an app and download and do Warrior's Breath or Wim Hof. And there are opportunities out there to access mind-body connection that are very masculine, that are very comfortable and safe for standard men, for your, I think you said average man or your typical guy who isn't in the transformational, spiritual, conscious community, to go and just get connected to their power, their body, their breath, and have some awareness of what emotional stories are running their life. And that for me is a foundation to having a conversation. It's the first steps.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say even, I love these ideas. These are all great. And it is, we try to overcomplicate things, but really it's always like, just breath and move, the end. It's not, you don't need a 20-step formula. And I'm curious, like, what it is, even, I was going to say also, in the moment, I think those same tools apply. So it's like, if you're in the middle of having a conversation, it's also like, are you tuning in, like just checking, like, are you even breathing?
As you were going to speak, right. I was like, even if someone, anyway, if all of us can simply start to bring more awareness to breath in conversation, and give ourselves permission for timeouts. Like, can I have permission for a timeout if it gets intense and I realize that I'm checking, and it may not even be those terms. Can I just have permission for a timeout to step away for a couple minutes and collect myself and come back to re-engage this conversation? Like, that alone has changed my life. Like, just to like have permission to ask for that if things get really heated and I do realize like I'm not connected to my breath, or to my body or present, or I'm just pissed off and I can't even hear you right now. So how about we take a 2-minute break and I'm just going to go for a little stroll and come back with a little more presence and a little bit deeper breath and a little bit more here.
Yeah. I'm also just like writing here as we're talking, because a lot of stuff's coming up. That what's happening too is a lot of these conversations that we are having are not being supported by two things. One is sort of this, and this is a very common human experience, like, this obsession of winning or being right. Right. So it's like, if we're coming in with the intention of, I'm going to win this fight, this battle, this conversation, this thread on Facebook, whatever it is, it's never going to really get us anywhere. If we're coming in with the intention of, we actually want to come together so we can have beautiful relationships and hot sex, very different energy. Right. And so there's this obsession, one, with winning. And then also, and this is a new one for me that I'm playing with now as I'm reading this new book called The Coddling of the American Mind, that's been blowing my mind. I'm only a few chapters in, so I can't really speak to all of it. But they're speaking about this, the obsession of safety, how we're over, I don't know, safetifying isn't a word. We're
Stick with it.
Safetifying ourselves, our especially the younger generations, where we're creating these bubbles of wanting everything to be a safe space. And of course, there's so much beauty. I mean, you and I literally create safe spaces for people. This is part of our work, so we understand the profound impact this has. And what's happening is, in a way, we're sort of bubble wrapping ourselves around, which is still a barrier. And we're bubble wrapping with this idea of everything is triggering, everything is offensive, everything is going to cause harm. And as much as I appreciate there being trigger warnings from stuff, as someone who is, a survivor myself, and as much as I think that there are literally the dance class I've created is meant to be a safe space for women to connect to these, you know, different parts of themselves. It's like, there's still, again, a limit, you know, there's a place where we reach an edge where too much safety does not allow for any transformation. If we don't fall and hurt ourselves, if our immune system isn't exposed to certain bacteria, certain viruses, we never build up the ability, the muscle, the autoimmune function to actually be around more challenging disease, to be around challenging conversations, not to compare conversations to disease, but just happen to be in that, you know. So I think also the combination of these two variables, this sort of wall of isolation that we're creating with safety, over obsession of safety and technology, and then also this idea of being right and wanting to be right, is just having us again go back up into our heads and dropping, you know, and not dropping enough into our hearts or the rest of our bodies. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Coddling of the American mind. Yes. Love it. Think it's right on point. Completely agree. Yeah, when we get bubble wrapped and there's that safety, my sense, even as you were speaking, is like the drive of protecting myself. Like, I know who I am and I have to protect it. Like, it needs to be protected, and anything that attacks that is not okay. Which I think is a really important part of being alive and part of why we're all still here as a species. And I also think that it doesn't need to be a spiritual process, but there's a maturation process of seeing that I'm more than just me, that on some level I am, at least my family, I'm part of something bigger than me. Maybe my community, maybe I can see as large as like the world and the population, that I'm actually connected to all of those things. And so while it's true from one perspective that like me as a white man of almost 40 years old and American, et cetera, all these things that I can attach labelly as part of who I am and identify as, I don't need to protect those things, because I'm also, on a very real way, also part of who I am is these other wider perspectives. And I think that triggering is part of what helps us come to that realization. The wounding, and then, oh shit, like this is wounding or this is triggering and this is not part of who I am, this isn't me, is what sets, it's almost like that immune system response. It's like, oh, this isn't part of us, I'm going to wrap it up and eject it from the system because it's a threat. That process, I think, for us is part of what wakes us up to like, oh, what is there to learn in that? And that's the transformational process. That's, I think, part of why coaching is blowing up, is people are like, oh, there's some gift in the wound, there's some gift in the trigger, if I can engage it in. And that's, I think, that is where the safe spaces we create are so important, is there's a time to do that, to engage it, to open up, say, okay, I'm going to get vulnerable, I'm going to see what part of this is actually has something for me, and go into that. And I don't think that either way is a place to live all the time. Bubble wrapped, protected, or fully and like open, vulnerable, I'm just going to process everything because I'm everything. I think there's a time and a place for both. And I would love to see that, like, that come forward, you know, both of those things be really valued. Safe spaces are great. And I love when conflict arises, because I always learn something.
Yeah, this reminds me also of a concept that we work with a lot in Sheila Kelly's S Factor, which is a sensual movement practice. And in there, you know, we work a lot with our students on the idea of, you know, a lot of people are very contracted. So there's always this like focus on like opening, on being more flexible, on but ultimately there's also a place where actually contraction is good. I mean, there's a reason both functions exist in our muscles. And so sometimes for people, there's actually too much of a tendency to open. So like you were saying, where it's too much of a dissolving into the we and not being in their individual experience. And then sometimes there's too much of this isolation, of this bubble wrapping, of this walling up and being in the me, or in the individual experience. And that ultimately it is a dance of the two, of being able to move back and forth. And right now it just feels like there is just a hyper version of one or the other. You know, it
Totally.
can't even be in the same person, but we're having a hard time finding that balance. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about what the disembodied male can do. As a man, what would you like to see more of in women? What would you like to see women doing, especially with regards to, you know, becoming more embodied when it comes to this conversation?
Mm. I love all the expressions of, I love embodied women in whatever energy they embody. Like, I find any human being that really truly owns their physiology and their emotions and their expression and shows up authentically as what feels like them, like that to me is always attractive. Um, I'm naturally drawn to those people. I think it's one of the greatest things in the world to see someone who's really knows who they are and why they're here and loves just being that in the world. Um, and so even as you ask the question, I'm like, women embodiment and embodiment of the feminine, I feel like are kind of two different games or two different aspects of that. Um, I would love for, I don't know, it feels weird to even as a man say this is what I would like, but I appreciate um, anytime women feel safe to be in their bodies. Like, I really enjoy being in spaces where I can feel collectively women relax, their nervous systems relaxing, and a deeper presence coming into the room. No matter what the polarity, like that to me is extremely healing in my own system. I'm just like, oh, okay, that group stress of is breathing, and that feels so incredible. And from where I'm sitting, that's a group game. That's a all of us game. That's not anything I think women are responsible for or should move towards on their own. Like, I really think that's ours to do together. Is when we're in those spaces, how can we tap in and feel when the stress level drops and we all feel more naturally and more at ease in our bodies, because there's a difference in the room. And once you know how to feel that, you can't ever unfeel it again. You always feel the group stress when it's in the room. And yeah, it's, for me, it's really sexy when humans aren't in stress. However they express that, it's really
Well,
sexy.
that's great. Yes, I think that this could be an overall. I'm pretty sure that's the case all the time, or should be at least, that everyone is that it's sexy or not to be stressed. I guess for me also, like what I'm thinking about is, you know, yes, there's a lot of work to be done on the men's side just because of historically where we're coming from. And I also want to make sure that we are addressing how the women can play a role in this and
Totally.
how we can show up to really make it safer for men to be able to tap back into that primal sexuality that they're now feeling they need to like neutralize. I don't think it serves anyone that we're, you know, women have been dealing with being asexualized for so long and having their sexuality repressed. And this is all the work I do. And now here I am in an interesting chapter where I'm seeing it in men.
Right.
And seeing, yeah, that in a very different context, but the same thing happening. And to me, when I saw that parallel, I got really sad because I think that this is not serving anyone at all for there to be this repression of pieces of us. And so really, I'm just curious what we as women can do to help you feel that actually we want this part of you. You know, we just want it also with consent. We want it with a change in the system. You know, we want it with like, you know, being paid the same amount for the same number of hours we were, you know, and so on. But we want, like, at least I do. So what can we do?
It's interesting, even as you were talking, like I kept hearing like, you don't, like, don't do anything. Like, it's really not yours to do. Um, and I think what I mean by that, or what I feel in my body by that, is like, at least from the masculine feminine polarity piece, like there's maybe there's a systemic, there's a gender, there's a communication, and then there's polarity. And I think on the polarity lane, that's where I'm like, don't do anything, because like, be fully yourself, and it's up to the frame to step in and say, boom, I got this. Okay, like, I can handle all of this. If I can't handle all of this, then, you know, you can't shift that from the follow side. Like, you can't engage the frame of the container from the inside of it. Like, that's not the role, from the way I'm seeing it, from the energetic and just that. I think from the communication standpoint, saying what you just said is really vital. I want all of you. I want your whole system. I want your power. I want to engage that, and I want to have open communication, and these other things shifting is what really allows that to happen as equals. And that's important to me. I think that conversation is really, really important to have too. And then just really open, honest dialogue. Like, I have a partner who tells me the truth, and that changes the world. Like, there isn't games being played. It's, what is said is what is, and that allows me. And also, she reflects when I drop out of presence. She, like, whether it's with her words or with her body, like, I know when I don't show up. I know when that container is dropped. And I think a lot of times in couples I've worked with and so forth, there can be, oh, well, I don't want to hurt his ego type game. And then we don't get the feedback. That was true in dance too. Women end up what we call back leading. Like, I don't want to tell him he did it wrong, so I'm going to kind of do the step without the signal. And now I'm just doing it because I know I'm supposed to do it, but there's no actual communication, and the fun, the vibe, the energy's gone. We're just mirroring each other, and it kind of sucks. And I feel like we're kind of doing that dance in different realms culturally. And what I would say in dance class is, like, let it fall apart, give them the feedback. Like, let whoever's leading, I don't care what gender or role or sex they are, like, whoever's leading, like, let it fall apart so they get the feedback. Don't coddle them. This is how we get the feedback back and forth to know what's working. And if we can dialogue, if we can stay in our bodies, if we can have hard conversations and be vulnerable, then there's room to grow. We can get to a point where we actually laugh about those moments. We're like, haha, oh my God, it fell apart again. Like, I'm doing my damnedest, and so are you, and let's do it again. Let's commit again. So I would say communicate, but don't take responsibility or try to do too much. In a way, it's really on that end of the spectrum to just say, there's a lot going on here. I'm going to step up to it.
I love that. Thank you so much. Where can people find more info on your work?
Oh, awesome. Unspokenleadership.com is my website. It's the best place to come and find me and see what I'm up to. Come check us out. It's really exciting to be bringing this work into the business world and helping business professionals just take the surface level of what you and I are talking about and play with it, and, like, just find really usable tactics and strategies that they can apply in the real world. Like, I think it's amazing that there are deep containers to go really to do transformational space work. And I'm recognizing how important it is to bring tools to everyday spaces like workplaces and offices and teams that can just bring that next level of, like, connectedness. So yeah, unspokenleadership.com is the way to go.
Awesome. Thanks so much, James.
Thank you so much, Nadia. This has been awesome.